has everyone seen the exhibition, and have they seen the picture we're discussing tonight? A show of hands if you have or you have. Well, if you haven't, there is a very poor reproduction of the portrait that we're going to be talking about tonight. This is the portrait of Warwick, and it is entitled The Prince of Darkness. But it's actually in a light box. I don't know if you could explain that process perhaps to us, Craig, and perhaps start off why you chose that particular medium to do this portrait.
Right, well, I love the film Samson and Delilah, and Warwick, he's the master at tackling the darkest issues we have in this country, and he does it so eloquently. And I felt with that film he carried us deep into the darkest space, but he held a lantern at the other end of the tunnel and he carried us through into the light. So I was wanting to try and express that in the work. That's why I decided to use light and work as a light box. So I'd never used the materials before, so it was all experimentation and lots of fun, I have to say.
Now, Warwick, I believe that is your nickname in filmmaking circles, the Prince of Darkness, because you don't, Barry Lyndon style, you don't like using many lights. Is that a deliberate choice?
Absolutely. No, you know, it's horses for courses. You know, some scripts need lights and some don't. But I grew up with you know, the Kodak and film like we all did, and today it's all about digital and zeros and ones. So it was kind of a really beautiful concept to. It felt like a piece of celluloid. When Craig sort of pitched it to me, it was sort of like the way he was talking about backlighting, and you know, that's kind of how I grew up as a cinematographer, and so that was really, really, really beautiful. The actual concept of light, you know, light pushing through from behind, which we all, you know, that's the way we've seen, you know, the little slides and that sort of stuff that we had. So, and absolutely, I've kind of grown up with a lack of lights, because never having the money or the opportunity to have big trucks full of lights to make films. So I've been sort of nicknamed the Prince of Darkness, because, you know, I just shoot things with nothing.
Well, I mean, I suppose it's an aspect of filmmaking that most people don't really think about when they look at a film. But like any painting is the absence or the presence of light. I mean, that's very much part of the filmmaking process. You mentioned the changes in technology and things. Has that altered filmmaking much, or do people still sort of strive for that quality?
The interesting thing about cinema today, because a lot of it is digital, and we use very, very little amount of actual film and process it and then project it anymore, is that, and because the actual digital side of filmmaking hasn't caught up to film, it hasn't got the latitude, it can't actually, and they spend millions and millions of dollars in cinema today trying to make digital look like film, and you know, and film's always tried to look like canvas. You know, it's sort of like it's the irony of it. You know, that they spend awful amounts of money to try and make it look like something that they that they could actually just do anyway.
Did you ever consider? I mean, have you ever tried your hand at painting?
Yes, once.
Just the once?
Yeah, just the once. I had a really beautiful upbringing. That the household that I grew up in, Emily Kamware, who's around the corner there, pretty well was painting on our veranda. And, you know, the whole of Papunyatula was sort of walking through our house. And, you know, I was born in the 70s, and, you know, being 8 years old, and there's, you know, Turkey Tolson and all these incredible artists sort of around our house. And then later with Emily and, you know, through Karma, which the place that my mother started, the Central Australian Aboriginal Media Association. So I've had an incredible, fortunate life seeing all these amazing sort of, the genesis of sort of Western desert art, and so I've seen it all, but I never, you know, I always wanted to paint skulls and all that kind of stuff and not dots, or, you know, because I really didn't have that connection to the Jukupa or the Dreamings and all those kind of stories when I was very young. So it was sort of, I started doing skull, you know, I was a bit of a heavy metal fan, so I started doing skulls and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Western desert painting and what we sort of now regard as Indigenous art. It's a very different view of the landscape. As a filmmaker, do you see any connection with that, or do you sort of attempt to see the landscape differently in some way that is related more to the Indigenous artistic vision of it?
It's storytelling, and the interesting thing about traditional stories, they are very much based on a 3-act structure, and there is a protagonist and an antagonist, and there's good and bad, and there is a moral in a sense, and so all that kind of stuff I think I've embraced, but it's stuff that Hollywood's embraced, so it kind of fits perfect in who we are as Aboriginal people with our traditional storytelling and that sort of oral history of 40,000 years. And this new thing called, cinema and celluloid, and actually projecting it, and and even new things like paintings. For an awful long time we've been doing that sort of stuff on walls in sort of rock art galleries, and that. So, but that that's something that I actually don't delve in. But being a sort of a later Indigenous person, I found cinema, and that's how I try and tell stories.
And Craig, I believe you were an art director before you took a part. In fact, you are a self-taught artist.
Yes.
Of course, you painted the famous portrait of Gulpilil, which was a huge success. Won the Archibald in 2004, was it?
2004.
And you'd only been painting for 3 years before that.
Yes.
And I also discovered that painting only took 8 days to complete. Quite extraordinary achievement.
It was.
I mean, did your career as an art director inform you as an artist?
I think so. I left school when I was 16, and I wanted to be an artist, but my father said that he refused to support me in doing so, and told me if I wanted to survive, I had to be a graphic designer, and then I could do as I pleased. So I studied graphic design for 2 years, and I'm very happy that I did. It's a very good grounding with all different mediums and so forth. So I then continued, I sort of explored many different creative avenues, interior design, and then doing events and set design. But I always kept the artwork to myself. I used to go and do sketch club. It wasn't until I turned 32 I decided that was it. I only wanted to paint. So I took off to the country for 6 months on my own and did nothing but paint and write, and disconnected from my whole past, I guess, and had to relearn everything. I was a little disgruntled with the commercial world. I didn't agree with what I was doing when I was involved in advertising and so forth. And I wanted to connect with my true inner self and core. So that's what I managed to do in 12 months. It was difficult, but then I was fortunate enough to get a gallery, and they showed my work, and I'd sold a piece within a week, and then I think I sold a piece every week after that. So it allowed me to just keep working and then work full-time, and it gradually built from there.
Well, I believe that the Gulpilil actually sold for the record for an Archibald winner. And you told me tonight that it's the most popular image ever sold in the gallery shop. Is this correct?
Yes, yeah, it is correct.
How does that, I mean, having that legacy on you and such a memorable winning entry, I mean, subsequent Archibalds, how do you approach them having won in such fashion? Is it a help or is it a hindrance?
I think it's very much a hindrance. Of course, everyone expects you to do something greater. There will always be a major comparison. That's why, well, I guess I didn't want to enter the Archibald again until I was very passionate and felt very strongly about something. And it was when I came back from South America and I saw the film Samson and Delilah, and saw a lot of Warwick's short films as well. And I was very driven to meet with Warwick and celebrate him. And that's what I see the Archibald as. It's a brilliant opportunity and platform to celebrate great Australians and people that are doing amazing things for this country. And that was Archibald's original intent. And, of course, to foster and support the arts. So, I wait until there's someone I really want to celebrate, and then I'll do a piece.
I mean, that's interesting you say that, because I think that intention has certainly been lost from the critical debate about the Archibald. I mean, people endlessly banging on about, it's the usual same old, but I think they do forget that kind of socio-political aspect of portraiture. Warwick, how did you feel as a filmmaker and someone who is very used to putting other people under the spotlight, or the lack of the spotlight, how did you feel about becoming the subject of someone else's artistic scrutiny?
It actually was. It was quite interesting, because it's like, yeah, no worries, buddy. Yeah, whatever you want to do, we'll do it. Yeah, the backlighting, we had that kind of conversation. But actually, the day of, doing the first sitting, I got incredibly nervous. And, I stood up in front of 300,000 people and, told a yarn. No worry, I can do that. But actually sitting made me incredibly nervous. I got really nervous before, and I actually had to go to a pub and have 3 schooners before and bring my sister to back me up. Yeah, I completely nervous, because I hide behind the camera, not in front of the camera.
I mean, were you worried about something that maybe captured that you were unaware of in your sort of inner psyche? I mean, what were you nervous about?
Sitting still.
Sat still very well, though.
But the beauty was that, I've actually made 3 films with David Gulpilil, and when I seen when you won the images on the news and all that kind of stuff, and I looked at it and went, oh my God, someone's finally got Gulpilil right. The madness as well as the incredible strength and this borderline kind of schizophrenic kind of journey through life, and I just went, oh my God, he's got him right. And when you rang to say that, we haven't talked about this, but when you rang to say, do you mind, or can we talk and maybe something can happen? I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Because I've worked with Gulpilil and he's an incredibly beautiful man, but it is very much there's 2 sides to a coin and that sort of stuff. So it was, it was like the perfect person, I thought, to someone who really divulges into souls rather than just nose sizes in a sense, And so it was the perfect opportunity, but it made me nervous as well. And that kind of like you the first time you sit, you go, okay, my face is quite fat, and and I'm starting to slightly bald. And I'm wondering if I can ask Craig to fill in the do a bit of yeah here,
take
and
a few pounds
a
off,
bit of this around here, and and it was like, don't you dare, you know what I mean? Because the exciting thing about the Archibalds is too that it isn't a Photoshop version of someone. It's an artist's absolute concept of who you are and where you come from and what they feel about you as well, And that was the exciting thing, you could have made my head 7 times too big, but that's the way you thought,
Yes, yeah.
you felt I should be. And that's the exciting thing about the Archibalds and portraiture and the freedom that you can have in that sense.
Did you sense Warwick's nervousness at that first sitting, and what did you do to try to allay it?
I did. Everyone's nervous in the beginning, and because you feel someone's looking into your soul. They're really observing you, so it is quite unnerving and challenging. But I know he's a big boy, so he dealt with it after 5 minutes.
Now, I read somewhere, this may not be correct, but you had initially envisaged using a black acrylic and having a very faint, sort of almost Caravaggio figure emerging from the darkness, and that was a preconception that you had, perhaps, of Warwick before you met him.
Yes, yeah.
What made you change your mind? And also, I'll just bring in a quote here from Kevin Connor, who's hung in the exhibition, the self-portrait. And he said that he does self-portraits quite a lot. And he said the self-portrait is the only portrait you can paint objectively, because you always are worried what the sitter might think of you or of the painting. So how did you change that process and do those sorts of things enter your head as a portrait painter?
Well, you're right. The original image that came to me one morning was a large slab of thick black resin, and it wasn't until you stood directly in front of the work that I wanted this ghost of an image coming through with the backlighting. So that's when I got the concept of creating the light box. But of course, when I met with Warwick a few times, I realised he's quite soft and really gentle and reserved in many ways. So that image just seemed way too heavy. It didn't seem honest and true. And while I was having the fiberglass panels made up, because we only met 1 month before the deadline, I worked on a canvas. So that was like just a warm-up and got to understand and know Warwick's face. And a lot of colour came into that. It was quite bright. And gradually that dark image, heavy image, sort of left my mind. And when I got the fiberglass panel, I realised there was so much more I could do with it, and started experimenting and exploring. The first image I did, Warwick looked very much like Che Guevara. He was like the South American freedom fighter. which And then the second fiberglass panel arrived, and I wanted to push that further and aim towards the black, really dark panel. But I decided to lighten it off a bit and allow more light to come through, and then to play with the warm colours, because Warwick's a very warm, approachable person as well. And yeah, I ended up with that final result that's downstairs.
I mean, just from a technical point of view, how do you work in that medium? What's the process? And were there any accidents along the way?
I'd never touched it before.
Really?
So I was fascinated with the fiberglass panel because there were many different textures that I could work with on the front and the back. So I decided that I would work on the back to begin with and then start on the front panel. Of course, I had to have a light behind the piece as I worked with it. I then mixed pigments into resin. It's the first time I'd done that, and you don't have very long working time because it dries quickly. So worked intensively on it on the front, but then I wanted to darken the surface a bit more, and I only had a couple of days left before the deadline, and I was experimenting with it, and then one night I came home a little drunk. Knew that I shouldn't have been working on it, but thought, no, I'm going to go for it. And I worked on the back of the image. Then I didn't like it, and I started to remove it. I'd used an acrylic base, but it wouldn't come off. So I started trying all these other solvents, and the only thing I could find was acetone that removed it, which is very toxic. But I ended up just pouring acetone into this fiberglass drum and just scrubbing it for an hour. And I had just got this beautiful wash. It was like this burnt piece of timber and charcoal wash on the top of it. And then in the morning...
Purely by accident?
Purely by accident, yeah, really. But once it started to appear, I liked what was happening and worked with it. And then I tried to get that on the surface in the morning, and that was the last day I had to work on it, and it just wasn't happening. And something that I did was completely wrong, and the fiberglass specialist just yelled and screamed at me and was like, get it out in the sun or it will never dry. So I had to drag it outside in the sun. And then halfway through the day, I went out to have a look at it, and I climbed in behind to check the back of it to see how that looked. And with the sun coming through, it was like, wow. It's like, that's exactly what I want on the front. So that night, I was downstairs in the front of our apartment block with an angle grinder with my mate, cutting the whole surface off the fiberglass panel. Neighbours were coming out, what the hell are you doing? You know, you're crazy, like it's due tomorrow. But it felt right to me, and then had to re-fiberglass the whole sides of it. So I just flipped it around and then finished off a few little things in the morning. And that was it. So
it's fascinating to hear the story. I mean, how does a deadline affect you? I mean, I guess in the film world, the deadlines are not quite as severe. But you seem to be a almost, what do they call it? It's a type of procrastinator who actually revels in the fear of the deadline.
And that is an element. I keep trying to change that. But also, I didn't get to meet Warwick until a month before the deadline, so time was short. And then by the time the fiberglass panels were made, there were delays there. So I got the third panel a week before the deadline. And the second portrait that I did, I liked, and I was experimenting with the lighting. And I could have settled with that, but I knew there was more to come. So I was just like, okay, I can either just sit back and have a good time for 5 days, or I can push it as far as I possibly can. And I always decide to push it as far as I can. I would have liked one more day, maybe, to sort of refine a few features, but the time frame does dictate the work. You know, you could work forever on a piece. But yeah, time is relevant to the outcome of a piece as well.
And did you get any of this urgency at your sittings, or were they more sedate affairs?
No, they were kind of sedate. You know, I heard about the chainsaws and the angle grinders and all that kind of stuff. But the most beautiful thing was, you know, when I sat, you know, and I write incredibly. I try to write visually, and then what I do is when the visuals are not working, I'll use sound to fill and try and, you know, create that sense of place for the audience when I'm writing. And the most amazing thing was when I sat, I couldn't see what Craig was doing, but I could hear what he was doing, and it was just one of the most empowering points in my life was to, Craig's got quite intensive eyes, and he was just staring at me. And it all started off just slow and really beautiful and sort of caring, cheekbone or maybe, part of an eyebrow or a bit of hair. And it was really slow and soothing. And then it just went zoom, 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 zoom. And his eyes just started, completely popping out of his head, and I'm like sitting there going, "Oh my god!" Well, he's obviously doing my beard, and just completely. And it was the most beautiful thing I've actually ever felt. Was just listening rather, because I had no opportunity. I had no opportunity to get up and look around and go, "What are you doing?" You know what I mean? It was just listening to the charcoal, and then from the charcoal, the actual resin and paint. Just listening to these things. It was so. And at the same time, he lives in this incredible place where, like, beautiful old ladies would come up and go, "Craig, how you doing on your painting? Do you want a cup of tea?" Yeah, oh yeah, I'd love a cup of tea. And it's sort of like this whole there's like all these people caring for, because Craig's doing something for the Archibalds. Everybody has to look after him because he will forget to eat. He'll forget to have cups of tea. It was so cool, every time we'd walk up the stairs, it's like everybody's like, "How's your painting going, Craig?" But, obviously, and at the end, he's out on the lawn, and they're all watching him with a chainsaw, cutting up the painting, the day before. We're all very concerned about Craig.
Now, Warwick, you've also had combined the art world and filmmaking. You've completed, I think, a 3-part documentary series surveying Australian Indigenous art with Hetty Perkins, who's the Senior Curator of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art here at the Gallery, Art and Soul. How was that?
Incredibly hard work. It was like straight after Cannes and winning the Camera d'Or. Basically, I had 5 days off, and then we went bush. Flew straight to Papunya in Central Australia, and then just basically for the last 2 years, I've been making this documentary. And we're just about to finish it. So it's going to be.
And that will be aired on what, ABC or SBS or?
ABC, yeah. And there's going to be some incredible stuff here as well because of, it's bigger than Ben-Hur. And so the art gallery is going to have, that whole, the whole 3 weeks that the show's on, they're going to have lots of incredible things here with artists that you see in the series are going to be here. There's going to be big sand paintings and all sorts of amazing stuff happening here at the same time.
Good. And yeah. Craig, a question for you also. I mean, obviously winning the Archibald has transformed your career. How does it feel to come back again and not win this time, but what sort of freedoms has that win given you as an artist?
There's always two sides to a coin, and you have to take both sides. It's been incredibly driving for me, I guess. It's opened a lot of doors. It was quite challenging as well because of personal expectations and external expectations from so many people. So it was a little tough, and then also with the court case that went on for 2.5 years.
People not aware, a case was brought against that painting on the grounds that it wasn't a painting and then therefore didn't fit the rules of the bequest of Archibald. Yes. But you won that, didn't you?
Yes.
And
so
it increased
it was
its
all
value.
clarified. Yes, it did. And it was, a lot of good publicity. So,
but was it stressful to go through that, to have someone challenge you on that level?
It was for the first 12 months, but mainly because I couldn't say anything. It was pending, and it was in the court of law. So I couldn't say a word to anyone, even though I've so wanted to explain it to quite a few people when they had no idea what was going on. So I had to just keep quiet, just shut my mouth for 2.5 years. So it was a great relief once I could stand up in the box and explain exactly the materials I used and how I did the work. But it was, the second year, I was perfectly fine with it and actually had fun with the whole process. It was quite a laugh, to be honest, being in the Supreme Court.
And as an artist, I mean, sometimes the people I've interviewed over the years for this sometimes find portraiture constrictive and restricting, and they don't actually seem to enjoy it that much. What's your personal attitude to that?
There's so much you can do with portraiture. I mean, the face is the most incredible thing in the universe. So it's infinite what you can do with a face and how you can express someone, different feelings and emotions. And I think a lot of artists are still caught up in stereotypes and I guess I could say the old masters and the expectations from the past. We can push it so much further. There's so much you can say with a face. There should be great things to come in the future. And, I hope more artists get behind it and sort of enjoy it and push it as far as they can.
And Warwick, would you happily sit again for another artist?
Yeah, absolutely. What's happened for me personally is that that piece of work for me has made me. It's empowered me. It's made me feel really strong about who I am. I'm incredibly proud of that piece. That person who's on the wall is an old soul. I think he's a Leo. All the hair and the gold and the mane and all that kind of crap. You know what I mean? And it actually, I'm so proud of that. And for me, that is something that's going to. You need those things in your life to actually make you feel good about who you are. I think the cheeks might be a bit too fat, but we can,
Here's a question for you.
That's the stuff.
Assuming you could afford it, would you want to own it?
I'm going to steal it. The interesting thing, the day of the actual announcements, I grabbed a little yellow card of, someone who was running around writing, and I wrote, for sale, $100 million, and stuck it above the little white card. And I turned around to talk to someone, and suddenly it was gone. I don't know why.
I would like Tim Minchin's comment when his portrait won, and he said, "I'm seriously considering buying a print." Well, that brings us to a conclusion, but all that remains is to thank our guests, Craig Ruddy and Warwick Thornton, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.